What is up, fellow sickos? I am joined by Andrew, Jay, Claudio from Knicks Film School once again. It has been many minutes since we last talked. I guess you can guess what we're going to talk about, though. It'll be the New York Knicks. Follow Andrew on Twitter as always, at Andrew J Claudio _. If you can't see the underscore on the screen on YouTube, it is there. So when you go to follow him on Twitter, or if you actually call it X, Y, but also just go follow him there. GMAC, how are you doing?
What's cracking, Mr. Favale? It's been a long time since I've been with you in pod form, you thermonuclear AFer.
What does AF stand for? Are you able to tell me? Is it
Andrew Friedman, the general manager of the Los Angeles Dodgers? Yeah, Andrew's a fool. It's like a shortened A at the end. That's probably what people say when they hear my takes.
I've never asked this because I've always assumed I wasn't listening to the episode or episodes plural that this was the genesis of, and I've always just assumed I know what GMAC actually stands for. But
so I'll give you the backstory. So to be clear, it's GMAC, like it's the actual 4 letters. A lot of people have made it GMAC.
I'm gonna continue to call it GMAC.
GMAC, that's fine. That's fine. It's JMAC and GMAC over at Knicks Film School. So 2 years ago during the offseason, when it was very clear that a lot of the things happening at Knicks Film School were under my supervision, under my direction, we do our super chats, and a longtime patron and contributor to Knicks Film School and supporter named Robert.
Damn it. That was the
Sorry,
name.
Of course, it's Robert Cross. Just started referring to me as General Manager Andrew Claudio.
Okay, so I got it right by guessing what it stood for. I just don't pronounce it the correct
way. Right. So he just started calling me GMAC, and like in super chats, and he would ask for like the most ridiculous GMAC. Can we get a party bus for the playoff run this year? GMAC. Can we can we do a Knicks Film School road trip out to Oregon to visit me? GMAC, this and that. And I was like, you're ridiculous, but this name is going to stick. And lo and behold, 2 years later, I remain a version of GMAC or GMAC.
Now, how do you know? Did he separate it differently when he was typing? How do you know it's GMAC and didn't mean to be GMAC? Like, did he space it out like GM space AC? Like, how do we know?
You're right.
It like a Blink 182 situation where some people have actually, mostly internationally, will pronounce it Blink 182?
Really? Oh,
yeah.
I didn't know that. That's amazing. And he's called me GMAC on our town halls before. We do a town hall every month for our patrons. So I went with his pronunciation.
Go subscribe to the Knicks Film School Patreon. Link to that will be in the podcast and YouTube description.
Much appreciated. On Patreon, he pronounced it that way, and yeah, just GMAC it became, and that it has stuck since, Mr. Favale.
I'm glad I at least knew what it stood for without knowing what it stood for, as I don't remember the genesis. I am very familiar with Robert Cross, who I assume has to be, based off the number of super chats he sends you guys whenever I'm choppering in for a post game or an emergency pod, has to have spent the most money of any Patreon member or just Knicks Film School listener.
Low-key an investor in Knicks Film School at this point. So it's much appreciated.
Robert, if you're listening, you should probably be asking for equity stakes at this point.
Valley, what are you doing?
I did not bring you on to just ask you about your title abbreviations. I wanted to bring you on to talk about the Knicks offseason in general. This is not their look ahead. Even though they're probably mostly done with their business, the Precious Achiuwa re-signing felt like, okay, like this is they'll settle into here and this is the roster. Let's see what it looks like. But before we get into each individual move, would you like to apologize to me for informing myself and my listeners on multiple occasions that the Nets would not trade Mikal Bridges to the Knicks? Or do you want to wait till we're in person so you could properly do it?
I don't know what I'd have to do in person. You could spell that out.
I'm a hugger. Like
I'll hug it out. I'll hug it out as an apology. I'll say this. I apologize, and it's been a consistent thing since that Woj notification occurred, is I've had to apologize to everybody, because I told not just you, but just about anybody that suggested Mikal Bridges that it's just not happening. And it was never a basketball thing. It was always like, these teams don't make trades. The Mets and Yankees don't really make trades. The Rangers and Islanders like never made trades. And I wasn't the only one saying it. All of us were saying it. Like Fred Katz had a mailbag on his podcast and shoot last month or 2 months ago. And someone asked, like, why would the Knicks and Nets never make a trade? Like, can you spell it out why this doesn't happen? And he said it was an ego thing, that if you're trading with your crosstown rival, there's a risk to it, because if that succeeds and you don't, it hits your fan base even harder, because you have to live with every day what the other side of the trade is. And so I just thought it was never going to happen. These teams hadn't made a trade since Michael Jordan was in high school. And for them to make this version of a trade, this level of a trade, and I don't know if you said this, I will give you the kudos, but like Julius Randle also doesn't leave the team. So they were able to get Mikal without trading Randle. It's mind blowing to me. So I apologize. I was wrong. I've had to eat a lot of crow over the last 3 weeks in this new world of the Knicks and Nets making trades. And lo and behold, it's led to, in my opinion, an improved Knicks roster, and what I'm excited to talk about and cover this season.
One anonymous scout in the Eastern Conference apparently disagrees. But honest, now I almost feel bad. I wasn't expecting an actual apology, but now you're making me feel bad over here for a little bit I'm trying to do. I always just framed it as the Knicks and Nets were never actual rivals, and the closest they came to was when Kevin Durant signed with them instead of the Knicks. And I understand what you're saying about the ego, or what Fred Katz was saying about the ego element of it, but I just couldn't buy into, and I guess that's more of a criticism of the Nets, where it's even when they were good, it was just still Knicks town. I do find it easier, though, if you are crosstown rivals, to make a trade like this, where you're on such polar opposite ends of the spectrum, where the Nets intend to be deliberately bad for the next 3 to 5 years, and the Knicks are trying to contend for a title in the next 3 to 5 years. It's almost like, and have a justifiable reason to think that they will. Even if things go wrong for one of the sides, it's just like, oh, yeah, there'll be trolls, but it almost feels like the two different extremes kind of contribute to making it possible in a situation like this.
Well, the thing that's interesting also is the player you're trading out. Like Kevin Durant was the last time I think I had this conversation with people. Like Knicks fans were seeing what was going on in Brooklyn when he first asked for a trade, and said, like, what about the Knicks? Like, we've been waiting for the blockbuster trade to happen. Why not Kevin Durant? And I thought he meant too much to that franchise to then suddenly give the Knicks a championship window, that I didn't think that that front office would want to let that happen. To your point, not only is it that the Nets are going to be very hard in the Cooper Flag sweepstakes next season, the white flag for Cooper Flag.
I've tried to get in the pooper for Cooper going.
In the
It's not
pooper for
taking off.
Cooper, that's a good one. I like the white flag sweepstakes, I think, is the better one for me. But the fact that Mikal Bridges just has no good feeling with a Nets fan. There's like no good relationship from all 14 Nets fans that exist. All of them hate Mikal Bridges. So I thought the fact that they're able to get a malcontent in a way out and kick off a rebuild, early kickstart rebuild, I should say. The fact that they're able to accomplish both, you're able to take out, like, oh, fine, let him do good with the Knicks. Like, we're trying to, our franchise is going a different way, and our fan base didn't really like Mikal Bridges. So it worked out both ways.
So looking at, I won't even say just their offseason in some, but because we talked very briefly before we got on about just how it went from the Knicks, I wouldn't say pearl clutching their youth, but to valuing their youth or holding on to them, to then they just trade all of them within the same like 6-month period or whatever it ends up going. Factoring in that to where you are now after they are now with the offseason whirlwind, getting Mikal Bridges, losing Isaiah Hartenstein, the Jalen Brunson extension. How are you feeling about this team just coming out of this? I mean, we're still in the offseason, but coming out of this whirlwind transaction period for them.
I'm the highest I've been on them since the 90s. And that includes like the one mellow year where I was pretty high on them. That's higher than last year after the OG trade. Obviously, it becomes a perfect offseason, regardless of what an anonymous scout that's irrelevant to me says. That's not even on the record. He says anonymously.
I didn't even know Pat Riley identified as a scout.
So I know, right? Yeah. So, but anonymously is the point. So we're allowed to swear on this pod, right?
Yeah, Of course.
Yeah, so no matter what a chicken shit scout is gonna say off the record, I I don't necessarily need to care what she said because the Knicks have arguably the best wing tandem in the NBA. They have the best, I think, set of personnel to guard the defending champs. There was a version of this team in January that I wanted to see what it looked like against the current NBA champs. And look, if deployed correctly, I think they can bring a style of basketball that the Warriors brought into effect with OG Anunoby potentially playing some like guarding the five with Randle being your hub on the offensive end. I just think they have a chance to be really good. They're the Deuce McBride, DiVincenzo, Josh Hart were all like high minute starters in the playoffs and the end of the regular season last year, and they're your bench at the moment. So I'm the highest I've been in a long time. And the Hartenstein, like God bless him, the Knicks signed him to too good a deal that he ended up becoming a $30 million player 2 years later. So like this is just a rare thing that happens. But even with losing him, it went from being a perfect offseason to, in my opinion, a great offseason.
I think the answer to even that question just lies in what we're debating about the Knicks, and it's are they just the second best team in the East behind Boston? To where like it's almost surreal that even 3 years ago that wasn't something that was on anyone's radar, and now we're splitting hairs over, well, is it the Sixers? Could it be, are the Magic gonna like wedge their way in there? Is it Cleveland if everything hits right? So like the Knicks, I feel like are probably still. I think Philly is the team that I would think I've heard mentioned the most, like other than the Knicks is the second best team in the East. But it's surreal for me, knowing my roots as a Knicks fan, but just based off covering the NBA for the past 15 years, the Knicks have not been in that discussion since I've started covering the league. There was that year with Melo at 2012, 2013, but like it was a year. It
Yeah.
wasn't, this is just like they've now incrementally built something to where they're really good. And I would say the prevailing assumption is that they are the second best, no worse than the third best team in the East, and that there's Philly, Milwaukee, there's Cleveland, but that the Knicks, based off what they did last year with a less talented set of personnel, even when you're factoring in Isaiah Hartenstein's departure, it feels like they have a unique claim to that number 2 spot.
You add in that last year they went into the season with a lot of questions. What is Julius Randle post injury? Can they make year 4 of RJ Barrett sustainable off his playoff success? And obviously we got the answer there. What's up with Emmanuel Quickly's extension? There's like so many questions about that version of the team.
Mm.
And then January happened, and they went 12-2 with Anunoby and Brunson and Randle. Then Randle gets hurt, and then Anunoby goes down the following day with a mystery elbow injury that turned out to be a surgery, and we never got to see that team whole. They're now going into next season with a ton of depth and a ton of talent, and this may be from day one the version of the team that we want it to be. So I'm with you that having them in the pole position for second or third, or I'll respect Milwaukee because I think we all kind of forgot that Milwaukee has like really good basketball players on it.
Yeah.
But like they're in the top 4 conversation. I don't know if their floor has been that high outside of that one Melo season. And like to your point, like there's a Carmelo Anthony shoulder over, excuse me, a Carmelo Anthony
You have
jersey
Carmelo
over.
Anthony's shoulder behind you?
I
That's crazy.
It's like very injured. I tore it because shout out to his torn labrum that ruined the 2013 playoffs. But there's a Carmelo Anthony jersey over my right shoulder at the moment. So obviously I have an affection and appreciation for that season. Jason Kidd was a starting 2 guard on that team. Kenyon Martin was the big midseason pickup. Both of them were out of the league within the next 2 years. That did not
Was that
lend
Kurt
itself to.
Thomas's swan song year too?
That's
Yeah.
the Bone Spurs, the Kurt Thomas year.
Yeah.
Not Joakim Noah. Rasheed Wallace was on the bench of that team. That was a much older team where the run did not seem like it was going to be sustainable. And this team, the oldest player on the roster is Julius Randle. So they've now created something that seems like we're going to get a couple cracks at this that I don't think Knicks fans have been able to have that feeling since the 90s.
What do you make? And I'm not going to get into, I did justify it. I think the pick cost, it was a lot for Mikal Bridges, but the 2 things that stood out to me is, one, you were always going to have to give up a lot to get Mikal Bridges out of Brooklyn. And two, even if you knew that they were going to get their own picks back from Houston, when you're not sending back actual players that the other team wants, the pick equity is going to be inflated. However, when I was coming up with Mikal Bridges trades, I too did not send Julius Randle to the Nets. I was told by irate Knicks fans that I was having the Knicks give up too much for Mikal Bridges, only to then see the Knicks give up more to get Mikal Bridges, and everyone was on board with it. That's not to troll. That's the way fake trades work. I'm actually not bitter about that. What do you make of the opportunity cost in terms of assets for Mikal Bridges?
It's an overpay. Like I'm very okay saying that they overpaid in picks for Mikal Bridges, but they underpaid in picks for OG Anunoby, in my opinion. So I know I shouldn't. Like in a vacuum, it's an overpay to give 5 picks, 4 unprotected, and this Milwaukee pick that's gonna convert next year for Mikal Bridges. Like I concede that. I combine the two, and if you say, okay, they traded RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickly and 4 firsts and the Milwaukee pick for Anunoby and Mikal Bridges. I think that is the perspective I've had in justifying an overpay for Mikal Bridges, because now your team's complete. Now you have the fully realized version of this roster that you can now take into hopefully round 3. And I'll just say it, round 4 of the playoffs, and make deep playoff runs. And look, the non X's and O's salary cap part of this that just flat out matters to the culture that the Knicks are building. The man went to Villanova with 3 important Knicks players, and they now have the final Infinity Stone from that team on their roster. So it now completes the puzzle that it's not even necessarily the opportunity cost of how good the team can be. It's how much fun they're going to have and how much fun they're going to be to root for that I think justifies just the all-in move that the team made.
I almost wondered too how much Jalen Brunson's soon-to-be extension at the time factored into. I'm not saying he wouldn't have signed that deal if they don't go out and get Mikal Bridges, but if that was something that pushed him over the edge, it makes it, to me, more worth it because of how it set up your team to be sustained financially moving forward beyond just the next 1 or 2 years.
Right. And I think the thing I'd like to know that the Knicks will never tell me, obviously, but
they should. But
they should listen. Next time I run into Dolan, I'll make sure I ask him that. The Jimmy.
Aren't you like best buds with Rick Brunson now at this point after summer league?
Listen, that one fist bump, that's all that mattered. Is I gave him for those who don't know, when the Jalen Brunson extension was announced, I was sitting in the lobby bar of the Encore Hotel in Las Vegas, where the Knicks summer league team was staying. So Rick Brunson was walking around on his cell phone, when the extension was announced. And I just, like, being who I was getting ready for us to have an emergency live stream from said laptop that I was on. I just went over to Rick and said, your son is our hero. And I gave him a fist bump. And I said, congratulations. And he said, thanks. And then went back to his fake phone call. Yeah. All that to say, I would actually be curious if the Knicks did that, like went all in and were like, all right, Jalen, like, you see how all in we are. How all in are you? Or if Jalen went to them and said, I'll sign this extension if you go all in for Mikal. Like, I wonder what came first, and if it matters what came first,
I mean, I would have to think maybe it wasn't make or break in that regard, but it definitely would be. You would have to think it's a factor. And the other thing that could be a factor here is, does it make Mikal Bridges next summer more likely to extend off of his current number, rather than waiting to hit free agency, where I don't know at that point if he would get the max, but my guess is he would get more than what 140% of his salary is going to be off that extension. So, and if that's part of it too, it makes the cost even more justifiable. But I think even in the vacuum, just because you weren't giving up, like, forget about the Nets situation. They ended up getting their own picks back. So maybe if they make that move independent of Mikal Bridges, they open the bidding anyway. It's just, you weren't sending any blue chip prospects out. And the way you framed it, I've not framed it that way at all. If you want to look at it all in a vacuum of what they gave up, you could factor in what they also had to give up to get Bojan Bogdanovic, because then he gets sent down the deal. It's still, Quentin Grimes is folded into there, and that second round pick, still pretty, I would think, a justifiable cost for where the Knicks are in the competitive landscape right now.
I don't know if it was you or if it was somebody else that I was talking to about this the day of the trade deadline when the Knicks got Alec Burks and Boyan for just Grimes and Fournier's contract and like a late second, right? And I forget who it was that pointed out. So the Knicks just made 2 in-season trades without giving up a first-round pick. Like they were able to improve the roster in both senses without trading any future first-round assets. So they still have their cupboard completely stocked if they want to make some type of all-in move. Now I think the curious thing for a lot of us, which is why the Mikal Bridges trade was so shocking, is that you build up an expectation that like the Knicks are eventually going to go all in for one of the big guys. Like it's going to be Giannis, it's going to be Kevin Durant, it's going to be Embiid. Obviously was like the big name, and then you spend 6 games slandering his name in a playoff series. I don't think the fan base would have been happy to root for Joel Embiid anymore. But the point is, like, Mikal Bridges is the name I think we all had in mind, and yet we sit here on the other side of the trade and we're like, so the all-in move that they eventually made was for Anunoby and Mikal Bridges, and I think their championship equity got significantly higher. Like I can't complain that the fact that they didn't get an MVP candidate. And so where this relates to Jalen Brunson, him becoming an MVP candidate also helped in the calculation, and the fact he's going to be making less than 20% of the salary cap for the next 3 years is pretty incredible.
I would feel more uncomfortable about the cost they paid to not get someone who's like Mikal Bridges is not going to make an all NBA team. That would be, it's not outside the realm of possibility, but it's most likely not going to happen. I think it's fair to say they gave up all this for someone who's not going to do that. You have to point to the alternative. And just like, even if you wanted Joel Embiid, I still think that would have been a disaster. Joel Embiid's not an option. Giannis isn't an option. Luka Doncic isn't an option. And they'd been sitting on some of these assets for so long that some of the assets, they already kind of started, like RJ Barrett was on his next contract. Emmanuel quickly was extension eligible. You can't sit on these theoretical trade pieces for too long because you either get locked into contracts that become less movable and less valuable, or you trade them in this scenario for, okay, maybe Knicks fans and NBA fans in general thought they had bigger fish in their sights. Who did they pass on aside from Donovan Mitchell, who this Jalen Brunson ascent never happens if they make the Donovan Mitchell trade. So like, I didn't see anyone who's criticized the trade or anyone who thinks that they somehow got worse. Are you related to Isaiah Hartenstein, or point me to who they passed on throughout all this? And I'm not saying they had to make the move. I think by getting Anunoby, they could have justified, we're going to sit on the picks for another year. They could have done that. Like they moved over all their young players already. So this wasn't an issue of worrying about extensions or next deals now. But you were thinking about Brunson's next deal, Randle's next deal. Like it would have gotten financially harder maybe to have matched salary without sending out one of the Villanova guys too. Like Bojan was expiring. So that's the thing that I haven't seen a ton of criticism of the Mikal Bridges trade, but everyone's like, man, the Knicks gave up so much for this player. And it's who was the alternative? Like who was the guy that was like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander not going to be like, you can go through the list of the all NBA players. Like, no, breaking up Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum was never a thing. And it's certainly not a thing now. So I can't wrap my head around that slant of the trade where, yes, they gave up a lot, but would you have criticized them for then not making a move and just staying where they are? Because there was no, if it wasn't Mikal Bridges, it was nobody.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, the other name that has been mentioned was Devin Booker. And I think that's like 2 off seasons away. And I agree with the Knicks in this window that they have. I think that's I think the best thing about, at least from my perspective as a fan and whatever we do cover in the team, right? Like they assessed this season and realized their windows now. And if the all-in move this offseason was to go get a Mikal Bridges about to enter his prime, put him in arguably the best situation possible to succeed, where he isn't the primary guy like he was in Brooklyn, can go back to being the second or third guy like he was in Phoenix. Like you're putting him next to another stud wing defender to create something pretty elite with Anunoby. And look, the reality of the Anunoby situation, when he plays, the Knicks don't lose. There's
Should you say if he plays? Is that
Listen, the if may be an important part of the conversation too, but like when he plays, the Knicks went 26-5 last year. So I understand that's only 31 games, but you're hoping that that peak now exists, and now he doesn't have as much of a defensive toll because he's next to Mikal Bridges, and vice versa. Mikal Bridges gets to play off of the other best wing defender in the NBA. So, they've now created this thing that could potentially be pretty special this year. And look, I can't believe I'm saying this, especially with yourself. We've moved on from articles calling for people's jobs, but the fact that Tibbs is also extended and you've built like the team he would want to, like the defensive team you'd probably want him to coach outside of like an actual rim protector that stays healthy on the roster. Like, I think they could be pretty special. Number one defense in the NBA, like top 3 offense next year. Like they have a chance to be really special next year.
Devin Booker's a good name to mention, but the Rockets have cornered the market on Phoenix Suns picks specifically for that reason. That's another name that almost came off the board if they weren't going to make this move. So what should Knicks fans and also just NBA fans in general, like what is the most impactful aspect of Mikal Bridges' fit with, like, what is the thing that you're most excited to see about how he impacts this team?
He could play the 3, he could play the 2, he could play the 4. He can run your second unit. That's one thing they really lost when they traded RJ and Quickly, is those were 2 important guys in your second unit. And the non-Brunson minutes just became a disaster. Even the January that we all speak to as like magical, Tibbs was still figuring out like, oh, I can trust Precious Achiuwa with like 7 backup minutes. And like the week that Randle got hurt, Anunoby, that's when he finally stopped playing him 45 minutes. And he added like this second sub where Anunoby would come out for Josh Hart midway through the fourth, and then come back in for either DiVincenzo or Hart down the stretch. And now, like, it's Mikal Bridges. Like, you heard me be frustrated with the Pistons minutes that I had to watch last season. Like the Alec Burks and Bojan Bogdanovic experience during the regular season was for the large part awful. And now all of those minutes will be played by Mikal Bridges. So just the talent upgrade in being able to put a guy that never misses games and play him for Tom Thibodeau, it's just I can't find the downside, and you can play him in multiple lineups. You can play with Brunson, you can play with Randle, you can play him at the 4 in certain lineups if you want to go DiVincenzo, Deuce McBride, and Brunson. He's Anunoby insurance if Anunoby plays 50 games next year. Like, how many more things should I say that are the positives about Mikal Bridges on the team?
I think what I'm most fascinated to see, because even dating back to Phoenix, maybe earlier on, but there was never a point in his career where he hasn't needed to be the top defender and one of the 2 top offensive options on his team. It's like in Brooklyn, he immediately shoots up that offensive pecking order and then remains super important on defense. But Anunoby is your best defender and even if you want to limit it to the scope of wing defender, that's still Anunoby. And then you have 2 better shot creators on the team in Julius Randle and Brunson. He's familiar with the latter role for sure, but defensively, like he's still mission critical, but he's always basically been the top guy on the good teams, or if the Nets thought they were going to be good. And now he doesn't have to do either of those things.
Yep. He's back in Phoenix, but like obviously, like peak Chris Paul's better than Jalen Brunson, and the Knicks don't really have a Devin Booker, but like he now can just be the 3rd guy and it'd be fine. And in certain lineups, be the 2nd guy. Everything you said, I co-sign.
Or do you have any concerns about it? Like, is it just you're scaling forward and it's like, oh, the Knicks paid a lot for him, and does this prohibit them from making upgrade? Like, what is there a concern about Mikal Bridges' fit on this team?
I gotta be honest with you, not one of my concerns for the Knicks right now have anything to do with Mikal Bridges. It's all like rest of the roster related, like
when you look at his durability and you combine that with the scalability of his skill set, he's one of you could probably count him on one hand, not one hand, but there are just few players where you could talk about no concerns putting them on a new team. And he's just one of them. Like, even right now, if I had to name off the cuff, it's Devin Booker would actually be another one for me, because he might be the most scalable superstar in the NBA, where it doesn't really matter who he's playing alongside. Like, we're seeing it with Team USA now. And so it's just like the only concern you could have, and I'm struggling here to reach, is he's been so durable. And this is me being an alarmist. It's like it feels like he's due to like not be super durable.
Well, if there's any coach that's going to test his durability. Oh, man. Guys that missed the game since high school, and Tom Thibodeau's sitting there like Birdman on the other
Challenge
side of the window.
accepted.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, man. Built in a lab to play for Tom Thibodeau, too. A guy that doesn't miss games and is a defensive mastermind.
Let's talk about OG. 5 years, $212 million. What did you make of that contract? I was surprised at how many people were surprised that he cost that much when I think, I mean, this wasn't it common knowledge that there were multiple teams that would have just given him 4 years and the $181+ million max. And so I was a little caught even in the sticker shock era. Like I was just surprised at how many people were surprised by the number he ended up with.
I'm being 100% honest here. I was surprised it wasn't more. I thought he was going to get the full max. I thought
he was going to get more, right?
Right. But I thought he was going to get the 5,220. Like I thought he was going to get more than the 5,212 that he got. And yes, it's like 8 million. So who cares? But I actually went into like the day after the Anunoby era, like the day after the trade was made. And it's like, so unrestricted free agent. If this works, he has all of the leverage. He just needs one other team to drive up the price. And like you heard, like Philly wanting to, like we this is before we knew Paul George was going to Philly, but like the pivot they might do is him going to Philly, and they'd throw the full max at him. And the Knicks were not going to be the Clippers in this situation. They recognized they gave up a ton to get him in the first place. They probably have to just meet his number, which is why I gotta be honest. I never got to a place, and Mr. Macri did. Some other Knicks fans did, that it was like I'm a little worried about Anunoby leaving, and I had enough people behind the scenes telling me like this is just how it's done. I'd be shocked if Anunoby left, and lo and behold, the day of the draft, we find out that he's re-signing, and I think that also was part of the Mikal calculation was, listen, we're probably going to lose Hartenstein. Let's make this all-in move, lock up Anunoby, and then go to war with these two wings. And I think look, I understand if there's some sticker shock. I would be prepared for even more sticker shock as the CBA continues and the TV deals that exist continue to dictate how much these guys are getting paid.
NBA on TNT as we talk about TV deals.
Indeed. I would tell anybody that has sticker shock for Anunoby that it's only going to get crazier, the sticker shock for certain NBA players.
And you did mention people might point out, well, Paul George went to Philly, and it's OG Anunoby would have just, Detroit would have offered him that. Utah would figure out another way to have the cap space to renegotiate and extend Markkanen. That's a player that fits everywhere. And what he does defensively, you can count on when he's healthy, you can count on one hand the same players that are able to do it. So I guess there's risk, obviously, because of his injury history, but that's, again, that's also part of the calculus of why you probably didn't have to give up picks to get him, first round picks anyway, because yes, the Raptors were clearly prioritizing players, but he was in a contract year. He was going to cost a boatload to retain. That's going to drive down. It's why Pascal Siakam went for like 3 whatever first round picks, I would call them. So I wanted your thoughts on it because I was surprised at how many people were surprised by it. And I think, I saw some people floating around numbers like, oh, if he takes like 32 million a year. And I'm wondering if that's what did it, where the expectation was set that he might sign for an average annual value of 32 or 35. And I just don't think that was ever the case. But because it was floated so many times, that it felt like people adopted that as reality.
I am not one of those people. And I ran into some of those people. I never once thought that this thing wasn't starting with a 2. And when the number came out, I was like, yeah, that he had them, but he had all the leverage. He had them by the whats. Like the moment that the Knicks traded for him and were successful with him, they were gonna have to pony up. And one thing that's been good about this front office with Leon Rose and co. is they really haven't screwed around with guys. Like the RJ Barrett negotiation, that seemed to be like, listen, we're going to trade you for Donovan Mitchell or we're going to extend you. Like they were transparent from the beginning. And the Anunoby conversation, it seemed like from the beginning, like they were interested in giving him, like it was a negotiation. But from what I been told, it was like very clear that they made him a priority, and they didn't let it get to the official start of free agency. And I'm very okay with the process, and I'm not one of those people that was shocked when it hit the number came out.
I was shocked in the sense of KFS was all over this, and there was reporting that said he was going to sign it. But I kept saying until Jalen Brunson puts pen to paper on the 4-year, $156 million extension, I'm just not going to believe it, because he's reached a point, even if it's in New York specific, anything could happen next season. Catastrophic injury, the Knicks suck, whatever. He is going, like, he would have gotten 5 if he wanted it. The Knicks would have had to give him 5 and 269, 270, whatever it ends up being. That is, even if did it catch you off guard at all as someone who covered it? I know you guys talked about him accepting it, and so it was in the offing. So I understand why you wouldn't be surprised, but I was still I think my reaction was, oh, holy shit, he really did it. It was just that's how I felt when I saw the news come down.
Like you said, because we were indeed all over it, I wasn't shocked, to the point where I thought it was going to happen the night before. Like, I was ready for it to happen at midnight, and then he waited until around noon the next day. And part of it,
by the way, another display of him being considerate as to not ruin all of our late nights.
I got an extended version of that. So that happened on a Friday afternoon, right? The Thursday, my wife and I were on our anniversary trip we were in Vegas for that week before Summer League, and we were at the Stratosphere, the restaurant that spins, and like, it's a whole view of Las Vegas, but our reservation was for 8:30 Pacific. So at 9:00, potentially, Jalen Brunson's about to sign this very generous extension, which would have meant emergency content mode. But I would have been at the top of the Stratosphere, not able to jump right in. And I had the artwork ready. I had, like, to give people behind the scenes, like, I had everything, the plan ready to go. Like, okay, I guess we'll go live if this happens. And like you said, Jalen Brunson proved that he is God's gift to New York basketball, in being considerate of me there. And then in a serious way, look, I'm a Mets fan. And for those outside of New York that don't understand this, like, the Mets don't win a lot. We don't get to root for the greats. We get to root for, like, the B-list athletes, like the David Wrights of the world, the Jose Reyes of the world. Francisco Lindor is a future Hall of Famer, but he's a Met, I never got to root for a Derek Jeter. I never got to root for, like, a great Yankee that the country appreciates and understands his greatness is not just in his ability, but what he does for the team. And the name that has been associated with Jalen Brunson this last 3 weeks since signing the extension has been Derek Jeter. And I think the comp is adequate. And look, the things that he continues to do for the culture of this franchise that hasn't experienced a lot of competence, they just continue to, the resume continues to get bigger and better and longer. And I'm really happy just as a fan to get to root for him. And the Knicks are just really lucky that they invested in this guy 2 years ago, and especially with what he's become on the court and what he has done for this city as a result.
To have him to just mention him in the same breath as Derek Jeter, and he's been with the Knicks for 2 seasons.
2 years. 2 years. Yeah. And, like, he's got to win. Don't get me wrong. They got to go and win some things. But this also is the state of what New York was. Like, again, over my shoulder, Carmelo Anthony jersey. And Melo, like, he said the public comments about, like, I wouldn't have taken that deal.
We know, buddy. We know.
Listen, you can know that. I could just remind everybody, OG Anunoby didn't take that deal. He could have opted in and extended off of that number. Isaiah Hartenstein didn't take that deal. He took a bag to go live in the middle of nowhere. Like, you don't fault guys for doing that. It should be unprecedented. I may be a little bitter. I just watched Twisters, right? Isaiah, enjoy your new neighborhood, all right? Anyway, I think it should be commended what Jalen Brunson did without, or not even without having to criticize anybody else. It should just be understood this is not a normal thing. Like, in any labor negotiation, you're like, I'll take less for the company. Like, no one does that. And Jalen Brunson did. I think they're going to take care of him down the other end. I also recognize his godfather is the president of basketball, president of basketball operations. His dad's on the team as an assistant coach. His agent is Leon Rose's son. Like, I understand the family part of it too, but from a union perspective, they're all going to look at him, be like, "What are you doing?" and he did it anyway. So
I would actually, the one point I would disagree on is that people were wondering, is this bad for the players union? Or more stars going to be expected to do this? And we might reach that point, but that's not because of Jalen Brunson. This is someone whose ascent to like real stardom has been 2 years. He might have looked at it and said, I want to lock up this money now. I'm a smaller guard. They're offering it me now. If there's an injury, yes, I might be able to get money down like next summer still, but not that he wouldn't have been guaranteed to get this, but it's not, this wasn't like a top, like an entrenched top 10 NBA player accepting all this money less. And the other thing too, that I think we all need to be prepared for, the contracts are getting so huge that these players might just look at it and decide it doesn't matter. Like this, the next deal, everyone's framed it. And I was going to ask you about this because I find the framing disingenuous because I don't know who needs to hear this. Jalen Brunson's not getting the $417 million contract in 2028. And that's not because he's going to accept another discount. It's just, he's not getting that deal. To think that he's going to get the 5-year, the boat, it's just, it's not, I will be shocked if that happens. More shocked than I am by the extension. If he gets the 5-year 417 number, I don't think that that's something that's, they might have said like, oh, you're going to be here for life. Like you'll be, it's just, he's not getting that number. And so when the people are saying like, oh, this is tampering, so to speak, he's not getting the number. So I can't bring myself to think that way, but think about that number, 417 million over 5 years. Jalen Brunson taking a discount at that stage is him except like, yeah, I'll take 350 million. Like the money is so ridiculous in raw terms of forget about percentage of the salary cap. I'm not going to fault the player if they get max offers for taking it because they should take it. It's on the team to figure out how to spend around that then if that's their market worth. But I think we're getting to a point where the contracts are so massive that taking a steep discount still gets you not rich. It gets you generational wealth. And we just need to be prepared that more stars might look at it. Oh, if I can win and still make $250,000 over my 4 or 5 year contract, I think that's coming.
So I agree with you that the number is getting so ridiculous that there's incentive to take a more team-friendly extension like what Brunson did. I agree with that point in a vacuum. So you're saying you don't think in 3 years, like the length of this extension, right? You don't think the Knicks would offer him the full max?
No. I would be like, I mean, if it's truly a family affair and that's what, okay, Leon Rose is still there, Rick Brunson is still there, and you're looking at it through that lens. But that if you're trying to actually build a winning basketball team at that point, investing that much money in Jalen Brunson at the age of, that's going to be him entering his age 32 season, that's going to be a recipe for a disaster. And it's just, I think this isn't Jalen Brunson specific. I think we've seen it with James Harden. I think we saw it with the Clippers and Paul George, albeit disingenuously on the Clippers part. Teams are going to be thinking twice, 3 times, 4 times about maxing out these players entering the middle of their 30s. And am I saying Jalen Brunson's not going to get maybe more money than another team would give him in a vacuum per year? No, but I will be flabbergasted if the Knicks in 3 years give Jalen Brunson. I mean, I guess if he's coming off an MVP, a couple first team All NBA appearances, but I look at it, he's not going to, first of all, given what he just showed, would he even take that number? If he might just say, well, why don't I take a little less and this will allow us to keep the band together? I don't think they're going to offer him that number. I think that's the number that's going to be reserved for you're a top 10 player, which Jalen Brunson could be at that point. I'm not saying he won't be. You're a top 10 player. This deal is not going to take you through your age 36 season, though. And so if you're saying they're going to max him out for 2 years, 3 years, he is not getting the 5. I will be floored. I'm not even trying to be, if I'm coming off condescending to people.
No. I just think we should bookmark this, and maybe you'll be someone will be apologizing to somebody at the beginning of a pod in 2028.
You actively think he's going to get that deal?
Yes.
That's interesting. I never would have thought that would have been your stance on it.
His godfather is the president of basketball operations. His agent is the son of said president of basketball operations. His dad is is one of the assistant coaches for the team. The coach is someone he's known since he was 6 years old. The team traded for every one of his friends in college. He runs a team. He's their LeBron. Like, whether he's qualified to be that or not is an interesting conversation. I think Jalen Brunson's going to be a consistent top 12 player over the next 4 years. And I thought this year was just the beginning of that. I also think they're going to win a ton over the next couple of years with Jalen Brunson as the engine, which is why you're going to pinch pennies with him now after all you've accomplished over the next couple of years. Now, some injuries may change that, and him being a small guard may change that. But if he's got any hint of production that warrants like max contract extension in a couple of years, now he may just take the extension, like you said. But if he's like, I'm going to take this one to the market, and I just compared him to Derek Jeter. You want to become public enemy number one? Let Derek Jeter go to free agency and test the market.
I mean, it's tough to have this conversation when we haven't seen the next 3 years play out, but if these next 3 years play out and they haven't made the NBA finals, I don't think anyone's going to look at the Knicks as public enemy number one if they decide not to lock themselves into a half decade of Jalen Brunson. I guess this is more a compliment. I mean it more of a compliment to Jalen Brunson that I believe there's real risk in the sense of like he's not going to get the $417 million contract. So to me, you can't just pencil him in for that and diminish the concession that he's making right now. And I think even so, the worst way to frame the concession is for the next 3 years. I've said he's saving them a Dante DiVincenzo per season with the pay cut he took. That's substantial when you're looking at the percentage of his salary and as someone who did not make real rookie scale top pick money during his first contract. And then it ends up somehow on his second contract. Okay, it's 9 figures and it still ends up being one of like the 2 to 5 best deals in the NBA over that span.
Yeah.
So he took a real risk here. And I think people have been diluting it by I'm not saying you, but by just assuming, well, he's going to get the $400+ million deal in 2028. And I'm not, this is me independently saying that maybe he'll take the extension or he'll just sign for less if they're making it available to him anyway. I just can't see organizations for a player in his situation. I think there will be 4 to 7 players that teams are going to get to a point where they'll do that for, like those full-blown 35% maxes at that age. And I just don't think Jalen Brunson's going to be the 4th best player in the NBA in 2028.
Look, 2028 is a long ways away, which is why you're right in that the unknown of the next 3 years is the risk, which is why him choosing to extend now rather than wait until he could potentially get a bigger bag a year from now. There's no guarantee that 4 years from now, not even that he's like, maybe he is like really good in 4 years. Maybe the Knicks are also like, who knows what they accomplish? Maybe everybody gets fired. Like we know who the owner is. Like that's the risk he's taking, the unknown over the next 3 years. So I agree with you that needs to be factored into the decision. I'm also very confident that if there's one player they're never going to pinch pennies with, it's Jalen Brunson. That's my take on my observations and my understanding of how the organization is run.
That will be something to bookmark then. I am curious, Julius Randle extension eligible. How do you think I think it always would have been a difficult negotiation. And as we were recording this, The Athletic reported that the Knicks aren't looking to trade Julius Randle for anyone who cares about that. How do you think Jalen Brunson, I know OG Anunoby did not take a pay cut, but when you have the best player in the organization making the concession that he did, does that impact how the Knicks like go about the Julius Randle extension? And then if you're Julius Randle sitting there, it's, well, what's the case for you to argue that you should be paid substantially more than Jalen Brunson moving forward? Does the Jalen Brunson extension complicate the Julius Randle negotiations in any way?
I actually think it clarifies it a little bit because I think you could reasonably extend Randle this offseason, which the moratorium, the ability to extend him is on Saturday. I don't know when this is coming out, but August 3rd, my birthday, is the day that they can extend Julius Randle. It becomes very simple. Like we either extend you and you're on the team all of next year, or we don't extend you and you're a candidate for us to potentially trade you because we're not going to let you walk for nothing at the end of next year. So I know what Fred's reporting has been, and I have no reason to doubt what the Athletic is saying about not looking to trade Julius Randle. I don't think the Knicks are looking to trade Julius Randle, but post moratorium, if he's like, I'd rather see what my value is on the market next summer, that changes things, especially for a team that just went all in. And look, I tend to defend Julius more often than others. I'm part of that subset of the Knicks world that wants to remind people how good Julius Randle is and can be. I also saw this team look really good in the playoffs with DiVincenzo at the 2 and like Josh Hart at the 3, and now it's Mikal Bridges. Like I'm not afraid to shoot 3-pointers. So, I think the Knicks can be really good with Julius next year, but just from a financial standpoint, if he's not extending, then you become a little bit more expendable. If he extends, like let's try to win something with you. Also, this new world of second apron and first apron trade hindrances where if you have more money going out, you're capped at the first apron, but if you have more money coming in, then no, if you have less
Yeah.
money, you know what I'm
You
saying?
have
If you
more
have
money
more
coming in, you're capped at the
at
first
the
apron.
first apron, if you have more money going out, then you're capped at the second. So you almost kind of need Randle to extend because if you need to put him in a trade that doesn't cap you at the first apron, you need that number to be higher. If it like Karl Anthony Towns has been the name that's been thrown out there as a potential number, and him and Mitch, if he extends, is the way you get to the not be capped at the first apron. So I, from my understanding, I actually think he's going to sign an extension with the Knicks. I don't think necessarily what Brunson did changes it. I also wonder Randall might be wondering what his market is. Like who's looking to sign to more than what the Knicks might offer him. A guy like that has all the playoff questions that he has and is now coming off a shoulder injury that ended his season, as he's entering into his 30s.
Yeah, maybe this offseason ends up being a 1-year blip because teams are trying to figure out the realities of these new financial limitations. But I kind of just feel like Jared Allen just signed a panic extension to me because I think people look at $30 million a year basically for it's like I thought he was going to get more and take this to free agency, to be honest with you. But I think you're fine. I think maybe players are finding out that unless you are Paul George and you have that cachet of not just an all NBA player, but an all NBA player who fits anywhere with anyone, you might have a tougher market. And we're seeing it. Randall's not, he's an all NBA player twice over. That doesn't happen by mistake. But I also think he's kind of in the same boat of Brandon Ingram, where we're talking about talented players that if the Knicks do shop him, or if he does take this to free agency, I don't think his market's just going to be, there'll be teams just lining up to give Randall the max or more than the Knicks would offer. That would benefit the Knicks, I would think. But I'm also looking at it from the perspective of, does Randall have some semblance of leverage here because the Knicks decided to go all in on Mikal Bridges, where, okay, yes, he will never need to be your top option. But even him is like your second best offensive option. Or if you want to frame it as your second best shot creator, shot generator, that is still iffy territory to me. Just after watching him in Brooklyn, I think, is it possible? Sure. I was open to the idea that he might be a number one guy, but after watching him last season, I was just like, and through the playoffs that first year, I can't get there. And so if you're Julius Randle, you're still, to me, very clearly the second best self-starter on this team. Doesn't that kind of give him a form of leverage that, okay, the Knicks decided to go all in on this guy in Mikal Bridges, who doesn't usurp me in that department. And so when they don't necessarily have the assets to go out there and get someone who's going to be an upgrade over Mikal Bridges, let alone Julius Randle in that department, does that give him some leverage? Or let's not call it leverage. Is he more important to the Knicks than you would have expected following a trade in which they just gave up 5 first-round picks?
From a financial standpoint, so let me start here. Do playoff offensive and defensive ratings matter to you? Like I know there's small sample sizes and you're only playing like 2 teams, but do they matter to you?
I cannot read into individual offensive and defensive ratings. So if it's like a Julius Randle offensive and defensive rating,
No. It's the team. It's a team. The Knicks
you
this
have to
past
play.
year in the playoffs had the second best offensive rating without Julius Randle. The year before they had the second worst with Julius Randle.
I think it's fair to read into Julius Randle's struggles, but if you had put that team that the Knicks had this past playoff run around Julius Randle that year, does Julius Randle get better just because the floor is going to be a little bit more open with Dante DiVincenzo in New York?
It's why I'm highly interested in Julius Randle being on the team this year. I think they can have a top. I think they can. Like, I just go out and say it. I think the Knicks can win 60 games this year. Like that's how good I think they could potentially be. 55 is even more.
I would normally say there's no way, but Tom Thibodeau will coach to win 60 games if it's
exactly. So, yeah. So with the fact that there's no games off, there's no load management days, I think that the Knicks are really good as is. I also saw that they can have a pretty good team without Julius Randle last year. Um, which is why, as far as leverage is concerned, I almost wonder if they're like, Julius, we have options at the 4 if we need to. You've been hesitant to play the 5. You can't play the 3. You can't really guard anybody. Like, the benefit to having you on our team is creating space and letting you bully ball with your gravity. And potentially losing Hartenstein sucks, but you can be the new hub that we run the offense through because we're putting 3 high volume 3-point shooters around you, so catch and shoot opportunities are aplenty. And then if Tibbs decides to play Anunoby or Julius with 4 shooter lineups, and like Anunoby's guarding your 5 and then is spacing the floor on the other end, then you have a chance to have a really special offense where he's averaging like 7 assists a game. So I almost wonder if he looks at it more from the Knicks perspective, or maybe he doesn't look at it from the Knicks perspective, but like the leverage actually lies with the Knicks because they're like, we're the best position for you to succeed right now. So you may want to go into the following offseason a free agent after that really good position to succeed. But who's going to be able to offer you the same environment that helped you succeed like we did here and is willing to give you the contract that we're willing to give you? So that's where I look at it.
I have probably always been lower on Julius Randle than you, but I am even interested to see him with this team because I thought before he got injured, there could still be maddening Julius Randle moments. I think that's part of the Julius Randle experience. I thought he got a lot better at the accessory work on offense. Maybe not even better, but a lot more willing to do it. And so now in the context of this team that can open the floor even more around him and make life even easier on him, it feels like this could be the most optimal version of Julius Randle we see, in part because there's a question, you've already alluded to it, and I'm going to ask you it in a little bit, but I want to ask you this question first. You're running the Knicks, which you basically are. I mean, what's your familial tree relation to Leon Rose at this point? How do you connect?
That's CAA that just called me, by the
Yeah.
way. I'm part of that family, you know?
Uh, what is the number that you're comfortable extending Julius Randle at? If you want to frame it as per year or total over this many years, like what is the walkaway number where it's no, then you can take this to free agency or your player option, however you want to consider it.
I gotta be honest, like I've been thinking about this question. You want to talk about sticker shock? I've never really had a good sense of the value of what like is a good number in that sense. Um
If it makes you feel any better, I'm normally pretty good at this, but we did an over under podcast on per year contract values before free agency. I went back and just briefly looked and stopped because of how many we just completely whiffed on. Like I got to Simone Fontecchio and I had him getting more than the non-taxpayer MLE and he gets 8 million bucks. So I have like no feel for this either, if that makes you feel
Mhm.
better.
It does. Listen, there's like one person I've ever met that has had a perfect feel for it, and it's Jeremy Cohen of Knicks Film School, our capologist. Man went on Fred Katz's pod last week and said, I think Precious is going to re-sign with the Knicks for $6 million. What happens 24 hours later? Like, well, okay, that happened 2 days ago. So it actually what happened like 72 hours later. But guess what happened? Precious Achua re-signed with the Knicks for $6 million. So he's been able to assess that market better than I have. I would say that there's as long as he extends off the current number, there's no real number that would make me walk away. Like I don't want him hitting free agency next off season, but if they went with like the version 181 was the number that I had seen as far as a full contract extension that I'd probably be fine with if he goes 181 off of this current deal, you know?
And you said if you had to make a prediction, you would expect him. He's extension eligible. I think it's you mentioned it, August 3rd.
August 3rd.
You would expect maybe not on the day, but you would expect him to sign an extension before the season.
Yes. I think so. I've been wrong before, but I think this is headed toward a Julius extension.
I think I would agree with you, at least from the perspective of I think extending is probably what's best for his career. Because I do agree with you that I don't know that he's going to have the level of agency or opportunity anywhere else other than New York. But it's just they're not building around him anymore, but they're still tailoring a chunk of their offense to what he can do. Isaiah Hartenstein is gone. The center rotation is Mitchell Robinson, Jericho Sims, Precious Achua is there. How concerned are you about the actual center rotation?
It's the only concern I have about this team. It's
Really?
I know that there's a head coach that loves rim protection. The centers on this team have been an alternating. You have to be a true center. Like he never experimented with Obi Toppin at the 5, like we saw in Indiana. He never experimented with Randle at the 5, and maybe going with
Do you
RJ at the
remember it was
4.
like 2 seasons ago at this point, or whatever it was, they did it against Philly. Toppin and Randle were playing together because it happened intermittently, but it was like it was minutes. I think it
Yeah,
lasted, and Twitter went like, "Oh my god, what's
it's
happening right
happening.
now?"
Oh my gosh, it's happening. It was like game 5 of the season, and he played them in crunch time. It was like, oh my gosh, it's actually happening. Um, we do this bit at Knicks Film School called Claudio Casino, where I create these fake betting lines for John and Jeremy to say over under before the season, and it's basically our season preview. And I gave Macri the over under of 100 minutes for Randall and Obi to play together that season that you're talking about. And he took the over, and I was like, I'm taking the way under, and it got to like 55 minutes total. So, like, I'm I'm a little concerned that, especially with the health of Mitchell Robinson, that if he goes down, which I believe at a certain point Mr. Robinson will miss time, he's got Precious Achua and Jericho Sims on the team, and he's going to be like, well, I have to have a true rim protector, and won't experiment a bit and see what Randall at the 5 or Anunoby at the 5, however you want to, however you want to classify it, which I think could be a pretty lethal lineup. Last year, he played Precious Achua a lot at the 4, but then there were also a lot of lineups where Precious Achua, a 6'8" forward, like he can say he's the backup center. Precious Achua is a 6'8" forward. Played a lot of 5 last year next to Anunoby. There was a playoff game where he closed with Isaiah Hartenstein available. We closed with Precious Achua and OG Anunoby taking turns with Joel Embiid, and it's the best defensive game the Knicks played in the playoffs. So I'm hoping that he leans into more of the experiment of, I've called it the Knicks Golden State the version of the Golden State lineup that we all loved before they got Kevin Durant. I've added the caveat every time: the Knicks don't have Steph Curry, but Steve Kerr did not.
Well, they have what if Steph Curry could win Defensive Player of the Year and Deuce McBride, do they not? That's not
Obviously, yes, but like the Knicks version of that is Brunson at the 1, DiVincenzo, Mikal Bridges, Anunoby, and Julius Randle. And as much as we look at that Golden State team and we're like, oh, Steve Kerr went to that death lineup all the time, right? It played 222 possessions the first year that Steve Kerr was there. Played 347 the second year that he was there. It was the 5th most used lineup the first year, the 3rd most used lineup the second year, and he only ever pivoted to it as a starting 5 in the playoffs in game 4 of that first finals when they were down 2-1 against the Cavs, when Dellavedova was getting IV fluid shot up in him. And he was like, all right, I'm going to go to my death lineup as a starting 5 and just send Andrew Bogut to the doldrums, right? And then the second year, that the year they won 73-9 and then lost in the finals, that lineup got outscored. Like, I say all of these that I don't need Tibbs to do this full time. I just need it to be an option. I need to see that he realizes that rim protection isn't the most important thing, and that he'll experiment a bit. Like, he doesn't need Jericho. Like, I don't need closing lineups with Jericho Sims ever because Mitchell Robinson is hurt, or Precious Achua. Situational, fine. You need to play a true center because the other team has 2 bigs out there that are killing you on the boards. I think they can get really flexible with some positionless lineups and just putting like 5 really good basketball players out there. And I think that's how you get around the legitimate loss of Hartenstein and potential depth, lack of depth at the center position.
I know a lot of it was by necessity, but I actually do think that we will be pleasantly surprised with how much, if not in the regular season, with how much Tibbs busts out that look in the postseason. Because it seems like, again, part of it was by necessity, but even look at how small his 4s have been. Look at how small his 1, 2, 3 rotations have been at points where there's basically 3 guards on the court. It feels like the past 2 years, season and a half, whatever, he's a way more flexible coach when it comes to lineup structure. And they've almost forced him to a point where it's okay. You like, even if it's Precious Achua, instead, like, that still counts as like him being sort of flexible there. So unless we do see Jericho Sims all of a sudden playing every single minute that Mitchell Robinson is not, it almost makes you feel like it feels like the Knicks had put him in a situation where even if he didn't want to, it's not like he has much of another option other than to lean into this.
You have the exact same takeaway that I have, that the roster they've given him demands that we see Randle and Anunoby at the 4 and 5 lineups, and like to your point about the flexibility. I mean, I spent how many years talking to you about I hope Tibbs plays quickly, like starts quickly eventually, and we get like he was just afraid to play Brunson and quickly together. And then we get to the end of last season, we get to game 5 of the playoffs last year, and he's putting a lineup out there of Brunson, Deuce McBride, DiVincenzo, Josh Hart. That's 4 guards. Like Josh Hart can say like
He's
he's
at best a wing, but he's a swing man.
but he's 6'5". Like Josh
Yeah.
Hart is not a forward, and he played a lot of 4 last year. And he threw those 4 out there in playoff games with Miles Turner and Pascal Siakam on the other side of the floor. Now, I'd argue that as many Knicks fans that were like, this is the lineup you have to go to, he was spooked that Siakam would dominate. And in game 6 and 7, guess what Pascal Siakam did? But man, I am also open to the flexibility that Tibbs will have this season, especially since I think the roster dictates it.
Is there, kind of moving on here, or do you have any early impressions of Pacome Dadiet or Tyler Kolek after summer league?
So seeing him in person really informs my opinion here. Tyler Kolek's passing just like jumps off the screen, and then like seeing it in person. The joke I made during the on Twitter about Tyler Kolek is that like the guy could probably find Bigfoot with a no look pass. Like the ways he was breaking down the defense, and then you see him disappear into a crowd, and the ball just comes flying out, and you just see, oh wow, that guy's wide open. And I couldn't wait to see what those passes looked like to NBA players. So I'm already there with Tyler Kolek. I believe the reporting that he's already factored into not the opening day rotation, but in the pecking order, he's already ahead of campaign. So I'm very bought in on the Tyler Kolek experience. Pacome Dadiet is a bit of a raw prospect, and I think the Knicks knew that, which is why they were able to get him on the deal that they got. And the guy's going to be 19 in a couple months. So I look at him as like, we'll see in a couple years. Deuce McBride didn't crack the rotation until year 2. I could see Pacome cracking the rotation in 3 years. The thing overall from both Summer League and how they've done the roster this year, for those who don't know, the Knicks suffered a plethora of injuries last year during the regular season, to the point where Tibbs was like, I got 7 guys tonight. That's what we're going to go with. Because Evan Fournier, who he refused to play, and probably justifiably if he wanted to win, and like Jared Jeffries, Daquan Jeffries, and Dwayne Washington, and Obi Toppin's little brother were just filling roster spots on the team, and they weren't expected to play. And now you have NBA players on the team that if you need to break glass in case of emergency, you have the option to do so. So, yeah, my impressions of both of them are that I think the one will absolutely factor into the NBA product this year, and one is a product or project that they can, because the team's so good, that they can, wait and see what he turns into.
I forgot to ask you this about the centers, and I'm sure they're going to want to see the games and the rotation unfold, but what do you view as the level of likelihood that New York winds up chasing another big for this roster in the middle of the season? I'm not saying to make, if Julius Randle doesn't sign an extension, we could talk about trying to make a bigger move, but just in a vacuum where it's okay, Taj Gibson isn't in Charlotte anymore, like he's just going around out there, we get a reunion with him.
They would kick the tires on a Taj reunion one more time before they actually went and got an NBA center right now. I think if there's a move for them to be made, it's that. The Deuce McBride of it all, his contract is outstanding.
And you can't trade any of the Villanova Wildcats, at least for a year, I'm assuming. Like, they have to be considered off limits.
You want to talk about job security? If you went to Villanova, like, you have more job security playing for the New York Knicks than anybody in the NBA has. Like, you want to talk about trade value rankings? Like, least likely to be traded, it starts with the 4 Villanova Wildcats on the Knicks, and then it's like Luka or Wemby. I think if there's a move the Knicks make this year, it's for a backup center. That's just the full stop. I don't think they'd go after a point guard. I don't think they'd go after. Obviously, I don't think they go after a wing, barring some pretty significant injuries happen. I think it's the Walker Kessler of it all has made sense to me. I would need Danny Ainge to come back to reality. But if he's willing for a center that was just playing summer league basketball, about to be extension eligible, if you're willing to get Deuce McBride and a couple of picks out of it that the Knicks still have left, then maybe that's a
You
deal
would
that can be made.
you would give up Deuce and those 2 first-round picks for
Not
Walker
both,
Kessler?
but I recognize who you're talking to. If the Knicks are desperate and Deuce is playing 7 minutes a game for a team that's already got all these wings available, and you don't have a center, like, look, there's a world that prefer Kessler over Mitch because of his ability to play games, you know? It's
I
not
would
even
just
trying to be like mean to Mitchell Robinson. We're in year 7 of the sample, though. You haven't played a full season yet.
I would be against them doing that in the offseason just because then you just know we're never gonna see the OG Julius Randle
To be
lineup at that
clear,
point.
I'm not saying you asked in season. Like, I think they're going as is the into the season. In season,
Yeah,
that's the move I
the
think they would
cost
do.
honestly doesn't phase me because there's a chance that at least one of those Detroit/Washington picks just doesn't convey,
Right,
and
it
so
becomes 2 seconds.
right.
So, as far as I'm concerned, it's McBride and 2 seconds for Walker Kessler, who I assume they'd extend, and, you have your center.
Interesting. You mentioned your only concern about this team was the center position, so you don't have any other concerns about this roster?
What do you have? I don't have another concern.
Wow, you seem like this is gonna be combative. I worry about the playmaking on this team. I think
Okay.
they have that the guy in Jalen Brunson, of course, no questions. 11 of 10, no notes on Jalen Brunson. I think they have a lot of good secondary guys or ball mover guys when you're looking at Josh Hart, when you're looking at even Mikal Bridges. Julius Randle kind of feels sometimes like he reminds me of like an 11th hour pass. Like he'll pass by necessity. It's not like someone who's always looking to make plays for his teammates. And then I don't know what to make of the Deuce McBride of it all. Tyler Kolek, of course, is a great passer. You already pointed that out, but I assume that they're not going to lean on him that heavily. And so when you get into the half court, specifically with the minutes, maybe when Jalen Brunson is not on the floor, you can roll out your best lineup. That's come up with your best 5-man lineup without Jalen Brunson. It could still be a really good lineup. I would still think there's like a playmaking the potential for there to be a playmaking deficit there when the offense needs to slow down. I think a lot of the times when you watch the Knicks last year, including when they were shorthanded, they tried to offset that deficit by just playing at these ridiculous speeds or trying to make quicker decisions once they got to the half court. Again, that's a way to kind of combat it, but it's something that I look at this team. It feels like they lack that. Okay, they have some slowed down creation thanks to Julius Randle, but that's not necessarily the passing element. Me personally, I would be looking for.
So you don't think they could do a lot of the things they were doing with Hartenstein as a hub, like moving Brunson off ball and running these Warriors sets, these blind pig actions, these Chicago gut actions that they were doing with Josh Hart, like the different things they were doing to create offense, not like naturally like you're talking about with just here's a guy, offense runs through him. You don't think they could do a lot of that with Julius Randle next year in the second unit?
I think I would need to see more of it. And you did point out how Tibbs has definitely gotten more innovative on the offensive end because I think a lot of people's complaints is that the offense was too stagnant at points in
Mm-hmm.
previous years.
Which it
Uh,
was, but he also had like a thought of I'm just going to kill everybody with offensive rebounding, and it worked. It disappeared in the playoffs. That's all.
I would be worried about how that ends up flying against some of the better defenses in the league or a fuller strength. Like when you're even looking at the playoffs specifically, you went up against a version of Philly that was hobbled and you just barely beat them. And then Indy, who you lost to because you simply just ran out of players. It's like but it wasn't this like they weren't an elite defense. Like they were quite the opposite, in fact, like throughout the regular season. And so I would be curious to see how that approach holds up over the course of an entire season. Yeah, sure, we know what the Knicks' second units have done in the past as well. If Julius Randle is going to be, but one, can you count on Julius Randle to be healthy? And then two, the other bigger thing for me is how does that fly in the playoffs against insert top 10 deep Boston? I mean, its team was built to beat Boston. So what does that look like against Boston's defense if they're at full strength?
Yeah. Look, I got to be honest. The Knicks offense isn't my concern if it was to be one or the other. They had the I know they had a 120 defensive rating in the playoffs last year, but a lot of that was because Anunoby was off the floor for the last 5 games of the playoffs.
I don't know how to read anything we saw from the Knicks in the playoffs last year because they were just like
Yeah, they ran
a
out of
shell a
people.
shell of
Yeah.
themselves. So it's like it's a positive when you're looking at what they did, but there's also still even questions with the positive or the negatives. And I see it's funny because I find myself not their offensive ceiling is through the roof in general, I think largely because of Jalen Brunson and the versatility alone. I'm probably more I guess there's I, I'm still just more uneasy about what their secondary offense look when you're looking at their top lineups. I don't think they're gonna have a problem getting to elite defense or elite offense. It's the when I start looking at the secondary lineups, to me, and I could be wrong, I recognize that. I could be looking at this maybe from too surface level of a perspective. It feels like they might have a harder time getting to elite secondary offense than, oh, the defense is holding up in some of those tertiary units.
See, I look at Mikal now with like defenses have to honor Jalen Brunson, defenses have to honor um Julius Randle, and like the shooting abilities of a DiVincenzo, a Deuce McBride, an OG Anunoby, and it opens things up so much more,
I'm
so
looking
much
at the
more for him.
perspective of not during the Brunson lineups, just to be clear. Like, I don't their offensive
'Cause-
ceiling is through the roof if Brunson's gonna be on the floor.
And so I wonder if the fact that I'll say it again, the fact that the Burks and Bogey minutes are now Mikal Bridges minutes, and if I'm talking about Mikal Bridges against backups, like that's not something I'm that afraid of.
Fair.
Now,
Is there
maybe I should be more afraid of like if they stagger correctly, like against the Celtics backup unit. But I think they're going to be able to stagger really well, fully healthy, I should say. But I think they'll be able to stagger really well when coming off the bench for the Knicks. It's 3 starters from last year's playoff rotation.
Well, I think to undermine my own point would also be if I'm looking at it through the postseason spectrum, um, there's going to be very few minutes where you have to worry about your secondary lineups because it's the playoffs and Tibbs is your coach. So it's
True,
like,
but there's also like 3 guys that he trusts a lot that are now on the bench. Like you know how weird it's going to be when Josh Hart plays 18 minutes in a game at any point next year. When I'm used to him playing 48 in
I
every
still don't think
playoff
he's
game.
checked out of
Yeah,
their
he's still
final
on
playoff
a
game.
court.
Yeah.
He's still on the MSG court right now with a microphone in hand, doing the roommate's pod, and just like, yeah, coach told me I need to play 10 more minutes.
Do you think that's gonna be an adjustment? Like, is that I guess could that be your concern is how is he gonna juggle the minutes because you have 3 players now in Mikal Bridges, Julius Randle, and Jalen Brunson, that you have to that you're just going to play heavy minutes. And I think you could look at it, well, maybe they'll play OG Anunoby a little bit less because of his injuries, but like those 3 are gonna soak up so much of the rotation minutes. And because so many one, because of how good they were with OG already, but because of how important he is to their defensive infrastructure with or without Mikal, it's almost like, oh, these are 4 dudes that are going to play a ton of minutes. And so is that the concern that maybe we've overlooked of, well, how are they going to figure out like how much Dante and Josh Hart are going to play in these games?
It is a concern. I'll say that the deployment of this roster will matter. Um, from everything you hear, Tibbs is big into lineup data, and I'm confident in the lineup that we talked about. And I think the way you make up for the fact that these guys are now backups is you don't need a true center at all times. So that I think
That
is
is the
where
way. Yeah.
that is the way because there's 24 available minutes there. If Mitchell Robinson is a 24-minute player, right, and Precious Achua plays 24 minutes as a backup center. If that's not 100% working, and you've got 8 minutes a night where Anunoby's your center or guarding centers, and Julius is playing one on is the matched up against the center on the other side of the floor. Like I think that could be extremely successful, and that's how you get an extra 8 minutes or so where for Anunoby or for DiVincenzo or for Hart or for whomever, and that's how you work around it.
The other thing too, it might just be beneficial to Josh Hart to not have to play as many minutes as he did last year. Maybe it's
Maybe,
just, yeah.
maybe. Now what's funny is like we got to game 6 of the playoffs when he was playing 40 minutes a night for 3 months before it actually wore on him apparently, and he got elbowed in the stomach and that's what caused it. Now who knows if he was like ready to pop. Uh but look, the Knicks are now at a place where they have extreme depth and they have again, the best collection of talent that I've seen since the 90s, and I'm very optimistic about them, especially if deployed correctly, which I'm confident they will be.
Anything else I didn't ask you about that you think needs to be discussed before I let you skedaddle?
Well, I'll ask you, how many wins would you say the Knicks win next season?
Oof, I haven't even gotten into my record projections yet. I'd probably say off rip, I would think like 54 feels like the number to settle into. I think there won't be the East, the bottom of the East is still the bottom of the East, but when you look at having it, assuming some teams are relatively healthy, like Indy, if Tyrese Halliburton's healthier this year, they've gone through a training camp with Siakam. Orlando just getting organically better, and they add KCP. If Miami's a little bit healthier, I don't view them as a real threat, but they're a team that can put, like if Jimmy Butler and Tyler Hero are playing in more games than they did last year. So like 54, 55 feels like that. I haven't even looked at I try not to look at over-unders until we actually do them. But that feels like, to me, fair. And it does, just knowing some weird stuff with Randle last year with his availability, but just knowing that OG is going to miss time, Mitchell Robinson is going to miss time, and I'm kind of just caking in like you have these billboards of durability elsewhere, and like one of them is probably going to miss sometime, I would guess. That's why, like, I guess 60, 57, 58, 59 is not out of the question because of who this team is. It's not just Tibbs, by the way. Like that whole availability thing, play as much as I can, is ingrained into the fabric of the players. I think like 54 is probably the number.
Okay.
What do you
I
actually have them at? Is it 60 is the
I
number
have
you put?
60 and 22 as their record for next season. I think there's just so many teams in the East that are not going to try to win basketball games next year, especially compared to the West. And they won 50 games last year with not like the health of Anunoby is going to matter, obviously, and like I could look really silly if he like suddenly misses 4 months of the season, which for his injury history, I'm not going to completely rule it out, but they just don't lose when he plays. And now they added Mikal Bridges, so I'm very bullish on this team. And like, we'll wrap up here. I the 5 times they lost with Anunoby, like what had to happen? Like the first time was a loss to the Mavericks on the road where Luka didn't play, and Josh Hart spoke to it during the finals because he was on the telecast, and he said, like we showed up, Luka's not playing. Oh, we got this, and they sleepwalked through the first two quarters, and they got back into it in the fourth, and they were a rebound away from tying the game. The next loss was MLK Day matinee that Jalen Brunson didn't play in. The next loss was OG's first game back, which is the second night of a back-to-back. They had to go New York to Chicago, and the Bulls went to and Josh Hart got ejected in the first quarter for kicking somebody in the head. Those are the only 3 regular season losses the Knicks had, again, with OG Anunoby in the lineup. Then the 2 playoff losses, Embiid had to have 50 points in a game he should have been ejected in the first quarter, and Maxey went thermonuclear at the end of game 5, and the Knicks were up 6 with 30 seconds left and blew it. Like, I could argue all 5 are games the Knicks could have won, and I'm not going to, because you obviously have to lose games when you have a player. But that's just my confidence. They don't lose when they have Anunoby, and now they also have Mikal Bridges. I think it's a justified arrogance, probably, but a confidence in the ability of this team.
No, it's not an arrogance. I guess, like, I was so much higher on Isaiah Hartenstein 5 minutes than Mitchell Robinson 5-man minutes that I think
Fair.
there's also the chance that I know I just said Mitchell Robinson will miss time, which I do think would hurt their defense probably, but I'm like, sometimes like that's not maybe the worst outcome in the world because then it does for at that point, if Mitchell Robinson's not available, it's okay. Jericho Sims will play. We know Tibbs will pull that club out of his bag, but where else you going, Tibbs? Like it's Randall and OG. You're gonna have to like if
It's
you
staring right at
yeah.
you. This Draymond at the 5. Like
I
Steve
this
Kerr
is
lost David Lee and created the death lineup as we now know it.
this is disingenuous because of how injured OG and Randall were and basically played no time together. But do you know how much time in terms of possessions they spent on the court without a big last year?
Oh, that is it 0 minutes?
2 possessions.
2 possessions, and I don't remember them. They
I'll
were
take
like,
the over for next season if we want to do optimism. I'll take the over on that.
I'll
How
take
about
over
you?
2 possessions next year too.
If anyone's aggrieved by me not going to 55 to 60 wins for the Knicks, just think about like this is the discussion we're having. Are the Knicks going to win 60 games? Are they going to
Yeah.
be just the second best team in the East? There's invariably going to be someone that thinks that I'm too. I always get accused
The
of being
internet works that way. I agree
Yeah.
with you, but like the
You're
Knicks have
probably
won.
too low at 60. If someone told you like 60, what was
How
the
dare you not think 67 is the number?
hashtag wins at KFC last year? Was
53
53.
wins.
So what's
Yes.
the number this year? Is it 63? Is it
Well,
full
so
on 74?
Robert switched it to hashtag the chip. Like now
That's
it's not
fair.
about wins and losses. We're gonna win the championship.
I want someone to start hashtag 74. They're gonna one up the 2016 Warriors.
Listen, if I come back here and they're like 40-5, then you better believe I'm gonna be talking hashtag 74 wins. Okay. Which I don't think they will be.
That's
There's no
almost
way they're
I'm
gonna lose 5
sorry,
games.
just knowing, and it's not just Tibbs, but just knowing who's on this roster, and if they ever, I would almost be concerned if they were that good because then I know that they're gonna kill themselves trying to get to 74 wins. I'm like, dude, just open the season like 9-9 and then take off or something so that we can ensure that's not going to happen. I want to make sure everyone's healthy and has energy by the end of the season.
There you go.
Claudio, this was great. As a GMAC, who I'm now going to call you because now that I know it's the wrong pronunciation, it makes me want to say it even more. GMAC, thank you so much for your time as always. Everyone should already know with the number of times you've been on this podcast and with just how fucking ubiquitous Knicks Film School is in the NBA lexicon. Can you just tell everyone where they can find you and all the fantastic work that you guys do?
Thank you, Pavali, as always, for having me on. I always love talking ball with you. I always love talking Knicks with you. So thank you for having me on. You can find me. My Twitter's down there, but if you're listening, Andrew J. Claudio _ on all of my social media, both Instagram and Twitter. You could find Knicks Film School wherever podcasts are available, on our YouTube channel, obviously our Patreon, which was mentioned. We have a newsletter on Substack. Jonathan Macri writes very well. And I think that's it. And I guess on social, we're at Nick Film School, SKOOL, because we're cool like that. As always,
Who took
again,
Knicks Film School with the K?
So you know what happened? The original Knicks Film School account back in 2019, because Knicks Film School used to start as, it was just an aggregation Twitter account.
No, I don't remember that.
Dude, it got suspended the day that KD and Kyrie went to Brooklyn. It was an omen. So that morning, the Knicks Film School Twitter account gets suspended. And I guess back then it was Ramsey decided, nope, Knicks Film School's suspended. And it was because of like some non-royalty free music from a breakdown 2 years earlier that does like 4 people liked or noticed. And that account got suspended. And so when it got restarted, it was as this with SKOOL because the other one, Knicks Film School, was not available.
Always love hearing about the KFS roots.
Yeah, the origin story. Exactly.
Happy belated anniversary. Happy,
Thank
slightly
you.
early birthday, but almost smack dab on your birthday since that's coming up. Enjoy it. Always appreciate your time. Love your work that you do over there. And I will talk to you soon, Mr. Claudio.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Fabs.